Picture a scorching Texas afternoon, the sun glaring off sizzling pavement, the air thick with dust and tension. Suddenly, a pack of fearsome bikers rumbles into the gas station, chrome gleaming under the relentless rays. They've got one mission: terrorize a sleepy town that has all but forgotten the Wild West days. But this isn't your typical showdown. Waiting for them is Harriet Clark, a combat nurse with nerves of steel and a deep respect for old-school American grit. She's not alone either. Retired ranchers, silver-haired patriots, and everyday folks stand shoulder to shoulder, determined to defend their community against the odds. In this high-stakes drama, you'll discover that courage isn't bound by age or circumstance. It's a raw, authentic showdown that calls to mind a time when neighbors had each other's backs, and no one was too old to stand tall. Want the full story, start to finish? Grab your seat, turn up the volume, and join us on this thrilling ride. And if you believe in stories that honor resilience and old-fashioned grit, subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales just like this. Harriet Clark squinted against the late afternoon sun as she pulled into the single pump lane at Rhodes's Fuel and Service, the lone gas station at the northern edge of Lonesome Falls, Texas. It was early September, and the oppressive heat pressed down like a weight on her shoulders. She stepped out of her battered silver pickup, noticing a distant shimmer on the asphalt, heat waves dancing just above the ground. Her soft brown hair, tied into a tight bun at the nape of her neck, lifted slightly in a teasing breeze that did nothing to quell the day's high temperature. The place was practically deserted, save for a young attendant mopping the shop floor behind the large glass windows. A chipped sign reading Rhodes Fuel and Service, established 1955, hung crookedly above the door, weather-beaten after decades of sun and wind. Harriet inhaled slowly, taking in the scent of diesel, hot concrete, and the faint aroma of cut hay from a nearby field. Such ordinary details steadied her. She had spent years in combat zones overseas, Baghdad, Ramadi, Balad, where the smell of burning metal and the sound of mortar fire had been everyday realities. Now, back in the States, she'd chosen Lonesome Falls for one simple reason. She hoped it would be quiet. Her time as a combat nurse had worn her down to the bone, and she carried invisible scars that still bled in the privacy of her thoughts. Here, in a tiny Texas town miles from the nearest big city, she prayed she might find some semblance of peace. Inside the gas station's modest store, Edwin "Ed" Rhodes glanced out the window at Harriet. He was an older man with a silver buzz cut and the easy confidence of someone who had seen enough of life to handle its ups and downs without fuss. Ed's sharp, gray eyes tracked Harriet's movements. She visited once or twice a week, always polite, paying in cash, rarely making conversation. Something about her told him she had stories that might never be shared. After all, Ed was a Korean War veteran who had lived long enough to recognize that kind of distant, cautious gaze, the slight tension in the shoulders that never fully relaxed. War was a universal teacher of harsh lessons, no matter the generation. Today, Harriet was pumping gas when that calm was broken by the distant but unmistakable roar of multiple motorcycle engines. The noise started as a faint rumble, building into a growl that reverberated across the open farmland. The young attendant inside, Reggie Potter, glanced up nervously from his half-finished mopping, spotting four dark, leather-clad figures rolling off the highway onto the narrow service road leading to the station. The lead rider, an imposing figure with broad shoulders, wore a vest emblazoned with a blood-red viper coiling over a skull. It was Colt Viper Stanton, a name that had become synonymous with trouble in the surrounding counties. His crew, known as the Black Vipers, had a reputation for intimidation tactics, small-time extortion, and sometimes worse. Harriet's eyes flicked to the mirrors on her truck, and she saw the bikers lining up behind her at the pump. Her heart rate quickened, but her expression remained neutral. In a fraction of a second, she evaluated possible exits, distances, and angles, an instinct she had honed in combat hospitals where seconds could mean the difference between life or death. She put the nozzle back in its cradle, replaced the gas cap, and closed the pickup's fuel door. The weight of her experience, her knowledge of anatomy, triage, and human fragility, settled in her chest. She hoped no confrontation would be necessary, but she also knew how quickly situations could escalate when pride and testosterone mixed with potential criminal intent. "Hey, sweetheart," Viper called, voice echoing against the metal canopy over the pumps. He pulled off his helmet, revealing a shaved head and a wild, unkempt beard streaked with gray. His eyes were dark, snapping with a mixture of amusement and aggression as he waved two of his men forward. They spread out as if choreographed, each wearing the same black vest with the coiled red Viper insignia. Their bikes rattled and clicked in the Texas heat, engines cooling from the long ride. Harriet turned around slowly. She recognized the immediate display of territorial dominance. This was the moment where intimidation was supposed to work. Out in a lonely spot like this, four tough-looking bikers might well spook a single person into compliance. But Harriet had been in more threatening situations, moments where bullets whizzed overhead and shrapnel tore through tents in field hospitals. She couldn't let a few men on motorcycles unnerve her more than enemy mortar fire had done. "That's close enough," she said evenly, raising her hand to halt their advance. She was not a large woman, but there was a clarity in her voice that caused the bikers to hesitate, even if only for a heartbeat. Viper regarded her with a raised brow. He must have wondered if she was armed or just unafraid. Harriet made no outward move toward violence. She simply held herself with the deliberate stillness of someone who'd seen real chaos and refused to let it rattle her. Ed Rhodes, inside the shop, had already reached below the counter for the sawed-off shotgun he kept there. He wasn't particularly eager to use it. He'd seen enough bloodshed in Korea. But he also knew better than to trust men like these. He glanced toward Reggie, silently telling the younger man to keep calm. Reggie looked like a deer in headlights, sweat beading on his forehead, the mop handle trembling in his grip. Viper stopped a few steps from Harriet, towering a head taller than her. "Just filling up," he said, flicking his gaze toward her battered pickup. "Mighty fine day to be out, yeah?" His grin spread across his face, less about friendliness and more about letting Harriet see the chipped, stained teeth beneath his beard. Harriet's lips pressed into a thin line. She could almost feel the temperature rising around them, the way tension tended to condense the air. "If you need gas," she offered, calmly stepping to the side to indicate another pump. "It's all yours." One of Viper's men let out a barking laugh. "We might need more than gas," he said. "Heard this place pays a courtesy fee to keep things running smoothly. Isn't that right, boss?" Viper gave a slow nod, his gaze never leaving Harriet. "Courtesy fee?" Harriet repeated, her voice going cold. She had encountered similar tactics overseas, albeit dressed up in different language. Gangs and militant groups would demand protection money from local villagers or from vulnerable supply convoys. It was the same cowardly playbook, rebranded wherever intimidation found fertile ground. Ed Rhodes decided it was time to intervene. Shotgun in hand, though pointed at the floor, he stepped out from behind the counter. He opened the door and let the old cowbell above it jingle. "We don't pay courtesy fees," Ed said, walking onto the concrete pad with slow, steady steps. "Not yesterday, not today, not tomorrow." The shift in Viper's expression was telling. A flicker of annoyance overshadowed the smug grin. He sized up Ed, noting the older man's confident posture, the sawed-off held casually but purposefully in one hand. There was a hairline line between bluff and readiness, and Ed seemed firmly on the readiness side. Harriet took a small step backward to angle her vantage point. Another subtle move gleaned from long-ago field drills. She wanted to make sure she had a clear line of sight on each biker if anything went wrong. Viper's men bristled at Ed's defiance. Two of them stalked closer to the store's entrance, where they could keep an eye on Reggie. The nervous teenager had put down the mop and slipped behind the counter, though Harriet could still see him peering out anxiously from beneath the ticket rack. Meanwhile, Harriet weighed her next move. She knew that brandishing a firearm herself might escalate the situation, especially with four of them, and only two potential defenders outside. Still, she also recognized that men like Viper thrived on cowering victims. If the townsfolk of Lonesome Falls showed any sign of backing down, the Black Vipers would assume it was open season on extortion. "Let's not do anything we'll regret," Harriet said, her tone steady and commanding. It was the voice she'd used in war zones when telling a frantic team of medics to hold fast under pressure. In those moments, she had been nurse, counselor, and occasionally field commander, all wrapped into one. "This is a quiet town. No reason to stir trouble." Viper flicked his gaze to Ed's shotgun and let out a disapproving tisk. I don't like to see guns pointed my way, old man, he said. See, courtesy fees are just a friendly arrangement. You scratch our back, we scratch yours. Maybe your station doesn't get trashed. Your windows don't get broken. Funny, Harriet replied, crossing her arms over her chest. That sounds more like a threat than an arrangement. Ed's grip on the shotgun tightened. The late afternoon light painted a burnished glow on the metal, making it look as hot as the tension that crackled in the air. We managed just fine without your arrangements before, Ed said. We'll keep managing just fine, thanks. One of the bikers, a tall, wiry man with tattoos creeping up his neck, took a step toward Harriet. She didn't budge, though her heart thumped a little harder in her chest. Adrenaline spiked, and old battlefield instincts reawakened. She knew how to dislocate a man's elbow with a single well-placed strike, or how to render him unconscious with pressure points. Combat nursing had required an education in more than just healing. Sometimes the best medicine was preventing further violence by incapacitating a threat. Viper cleared his throat, pulling the wiry man back. He recognized that Harriet wasn't an ordinary civilian. Still, the gang leader had his reputation to uphold. Turning to Ed, Viper said, I'll give you some time to think it over. Next time we come round, have our courtesy fee ready. Otherwise, you might find yourselves missing a few things. Windows, tires, who knows. Ed's jaw set like stone, but Harriet placed a discreet hand on his elbow to keep him from lifting the shotgun. She sensed the bikers weren't ready to start an all-out brawl. Not yet. This was still the intimidation phase. As if reading her mind, Viper sneered. You're new here, he said to Harriet. We got a good look at you. Don't make us pay you a visit at your place too. Ach. The threat was unsubtle, and Harriet's pulse hammered, but she refused to show fear. You'll find me less welcoming than you think, she answered. A flicker of confusion, maybe even respect, passed across Viper's face. Then he gestured for his men to back away. They climbed onto their roaring bikes and, with a final glare in Ed's direction, peeled out onto the highway. The echo of engines faded into the distance, leaving the gas station parking lot silent once more, except for the rasp of Harriet's breath. This small confrontation had concluded, but she knew it was only the prelude. People like Colt Viper Stanton didn't just let go of a perceived insult. They came back, and they came back harder. Harriet met Ed's eyes. The older man gave a resigned nod, lowering his shotgun. Never thought I'd see the day, he muttered, leaning the weapon against the concrete wall near the door. Been running this place for 30 years without trouble like that. Sure, I've had rowdy folks, but no one so bold about demanding a payoff. Times are changing, Harriet said, stepping inside. The cool air from the overworked ceiling fan was a stark contrast to the scorching sun outside. She spotted Reggie lurking behind the counter, his knuckles white from clenching them too hard. The poor kid seemed on the verge of hyperventilating. Hey, Harriet said gently, leaning on the counter. You good? Reggie blinked, nodding a bit too enthusiastically. I'm fine, he stammered, though his trembling voice betrayed him. Mr. Rhodes, you want me to call the sheriff? Maybe they can catch him? Ed sighed, rubbing a large hand across his face. Might as well. The sheriff is old Wayne Townsend. He's got a single deputy covering half the county. They won't arrive fast. But maybe it's time we let them know trouble's brewing. He glanced up, noticing Harriet's calm composure. You stuck around through that. Means a lot. You could have driven off. She gave a small shrug. I've seen worse, and I don't like bullies. The memory of battered villages in the Middle East, scrounging for safety under the watchful eyes of armed militias, flitted through her mind. If we don't stand up now, they'll assume they can do what they want, whenever they want. Ed nodded in agreement. I won't pay them a dime, but you know how these gangs operate. If we refuse, they'll escalate. Then we escalate in our own way, Harriet replied, stealing her expression. She looked around the store, dust motes swirling in the rays of sunlight, old postcards from travelers pinned to a bulletin board, a worn newspaper rack, and a single tiny table with two mismatched chairs. We can keep track of anything suspicious, build a record. Maybe we can warn the rest of the folks in town to keep an eye out. Reggie cleared his throat. We have a Facebook group for Lonesome Falls. It's mostly used for posting about lost dogs in the farmer's market, but maybe we can spread word there too. Ed smiled at the idea, patting the counter. That's not a bad start. And once the sheriff shows up, we can see if we can do something more official. Harriet felt a strange sense of determination ignite inside her. For months since returning stateside, she'd been adrift, no longer needed in a combat zone, not sure where to direct her energy. Now a sense of purpose fluttered into her chest. I'm good with planning, she said simply. In my old unit, I was in charge of organizing triage under fire. Maybe we can figure out how to triage this town against an organized threat. Ed gave a small laugh at that. Triage a town, huh? I like the sound of that. You tell me what you need, and I'll do my best to make it happen. Reggie will get the word out online. Lord knows folks around here pay attention to local scuttlebutt. Harriet nodded, a plan forming in the back of her mind. If the Black Vipers were truly serious, they'd come back in greater force. Maybe not today, but soon. And if the people of Lonesome Falls were unprepared, they'd be at the gang's mercy. But with coordination, vigilance, and clear-headedness, Harriet believed they could stand up for themselves. She wasn't about to let a new wave of intimidation destroy the small-town calm she'd searched so long to find. It took nearly an hour for Sheriff Wayne Townsend and his deputy Janet Lopez to arrive, both looking tired and wary as they stepped into Rhodes's Fuel and Service. Sheriff Townsend was a paunchy man in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair peeking out from under a sweat-stained Stetson. He walked with a slight limp, an old rodeo injury, locals said. Deputy Lopez, a tall Latina woman maybe in her early 30s, surveyed the store with quick, assessing eyes. Despite the battered uniform and the dust clinging to their boots, both wore an air of quiet competence. Ed ushered them to the little table near the counter. Reggie hovered in the background, apparently eager to share his version of events, but Harriet could see he was holding himself back to let Ed talk first. Harriet sat across from the two law officers, hands folded on the table, recounting the entire confrontation from start to finish. The sheriff scratched notes in a spiral notebook. So they just drove off, threatened to come back for a courtesy fee, Townsend said, lips tightening into a grim line. We've had folks from out of town stirring up trouble before, but nothing this organized or direct. Deputy Lopez nodded. We've heard rumors about a club calling themselves the Black Vipers. Mostly petty stuff, bar fights, property damage. But they seem to be growing bolder. She looked between Harriet and Ed, taking note of the quietly determined set to Harriet's shoulders. Ma'am, you said you used to be in the military? I was a combat nurse, Harriet replied, carefully choosing her words. I've seen groups like this try to exploit vulnerable communities overseas. They thrive on intimidation and the belief that no one will stand up to them. The sheriff let out a weary sigh. And our county's budget is spread thin. We only have a handful of deputies. If the Vipers roll in with more than a few riders, we'll be outnumbered. Ed leaned forward. Sheriff, we're willing to do our part here in Lonesome Falls. We don't want to break any laws or endanger ourselves unnecessarily, but we also can't just roll over and pay them off. Townsend rubbed his eyes, the crow's feet around them deepening. I respect that, Rhodes. The question is how to handle them until we can get some additional support. State police might be able to help if these guys cause enough commotion, but we need evidence. Reggie piped up, waving his phone. I posted on the Lonesome Falls Facebook group about what happened. People are already sharing it around. Mrs. Channing at the hardware store said she wants to install cameras. We might be able to get a few more folks to do the same. Deputy Lopez nodded. Documentation is key. Photos, videos, license plate numbers, anything we can show a judge or the state police to indicate this is part of a larger pattern. Harriet, thinking of all the ways small villages in war zones had warded off militias by banding together, spoke up. It's not just cameras. We can create a kind of neighborhood watch on steroids. People checking on each other, calling out suspicious behavior, rotating through watch shifts. If the Vipers can't move around town unseen, they lose a big advantage. The sheriff smiled wryly at that. You sure you're ready to sign up to be the unofficial security coordinator for this town? We can't pay you. Harriet shrugged. I'm already here, and I don't run from bullies. Might as well help. A flicker of gratitude appeared on Ed's face, and Reggie's wide-eyed admiration left no doubt he considered Harriet something of a local hero. But Harriet didn't see herself that way. She simply didn't want to watch another place get crushed by senseless violence. Word traveled fast in Lonesome Falls. By late afternoon the next day, Harriet found herself standing in the back room of Johnson's Feed Supply, a sprawling barn-like store where half the residents bought their livestock feed and gardening tools. The proprietor, Manny Johnson, offered the space for a quick impromptu meeting of local business owners, farmers, and ranchers concerned about the black vipers. Chairs were set up in haphazard rows. Sheriff Townsend stood at the front, trying to project calm authority as he explained the situation. Ed Rhodes was beside him, arms folded, nodding gravely. Deputy Lopez kept glancing at Harriet, silently cueing her to be ready to speak. Harriet's heart pounded a little faster, but she steeled herself. She had briefed large medical teams in emergency combat triage. She could talk to civilians about safety and cooperation. A hush fell over the crowd as Harriet took a couple of steps forward. She cleared her throat. "I know some of you don't know me," she began, voice echoing off the store's tall, corrugated metal walls. "I'm Harriet Clark. I moved here a few months back. I was a combat nurse in the Middle East, where I saw firsthand how organized groups took advantage of communities that didn't cooperate with each other." She paused, meeting the gazes of men in cowboy hats, women in aprons, older residents hunched over canes, and younger folks with skeptical expressions. What these bikers are trying to do is classic intimidation. If we stand apart, each business for itself, they'll pick us off one by one, so to speak. If we stand together, they'll have a much harder time. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Manny Johnson nodded thoughtfully, exchanging a glance with the local diner owner, Lucy Caldwell. Lucy had reported seeing 3 suspicious bikers casing her diner early that morning. Harriet raised her hands to quiet the noise. "Here's my suggestion," she continued. "First, we get cameras installed wherever possible. Businesses, private homes, even trailer parks. If you can't afford a camera, maybe another neighbor can chip in. Second, we keep each other informed. Reggie Potter has set up an online group for real-time alerts, but we also know not everyone is tech-savvy. So we'll use phone trees and designated runners who can drive out to remote ranches. Third, we coordinate with the sheriff's office, gather evidence, photos, videos, dates, times, license plates, or even descriptions of what these bikers are wearing and doing. That way, when we call for state or federal help, we have a strong case." Sheriff Townsend coughed politely and added, "Remember, we're not vigilantes. We're not forming a militia. We're simply watchers, gatherers of information. Deputy Lopez and I will do what we can, but we're limited in manpower. We need your help." "Sure." A man in the second row, Henry Hank Porter, owner of the local auto repair shop, raised his hand. "What about if they come in bigger numbers?" he asked. "I've been hearing rumors that these vipers might have ties to other biker clubs. We can't outgun a whole army, can we?" Harriet exhaled slowly. "If they come in big numbers, we'll do exactly the same thing. Document, warn each other, and avoid direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary. The more evidence we gather, the more pressure we can put on the authorities to help us. These gang members might look tough, but they often have parole violations, warrants, or criminal records that make them vulnerable if they're caught committing new crimes on camera. That's our advantage." A wave of nods and murmured agreement spread through the group. For many, it was the first time they'd felt empowered instead of helpless in the face of a threat. Harriet scanned their faces, seeing uncertainty, but also determination. The question was whether that resolve would hold when the bikers returned. She recalled the nights she'd spent in makeshift hospitals overseas, listening to the thunder of distant shelling, praying the next strike wouldn't flatten the building. This felt like a different battlefield, but the stakes were just as high for these townsfolk and their families. Over the next week, Lonesome Falls began its quiet transformation. Harriet organized volunteer teams to check on local businesses twice a day, morning and close of business. Ed Rhodes helped Manny Johnson install new security cameras at the feed supply store. Hank Porter put up floodlights around his auto repair shop, while Lucy Caldwell got a simple smartphone-based camera system that sent alerts whenever someone approached the diner after hours. Even the local high school principal, Robin Donahue, got involved, asking Harriet for tips on how to keep the campus safer if the Vipers decided to harass students. Deputy Lopez coordinated with Harriet, helping track suspicious sightings. A black leather jacket seen driving slowly by the grocery store. A couple of men on motorcycles circling the outskirts of the trailer park near the old cotton gin. Each incident was noted, photographed if possible, and reported. Though there were no direct confrontations, the sense of a growing siege settled on the town. Harriet sensed that the Black Vipers were testing them, gauging how the community might respond. Late one afternoon, Harriet stopped by the local clinic run by Dr. Amira Patel, the only full-time physician in Lonesome Falls. Harriet had volunteered to help with medical chores a few days a week, both to keep her nursing skills sharp and to deepen her ties within the town. As she finished organizing the supply closet, she overheard Dr. Patel greeting a patient who limped into the waiting room. The man was named Travis Cole, a ranch hand who mumbled that he'd taken a bad fall, but Harriet's instincts flared at the bruises on his arms, shaped suspiciously like handprints. Travis, eyes downcast, admitted after some prodding that two bikers had confronted him near the old rail yard. They demanded money, threatened to ruin his truck if he didn't comply. When he resisted, one of them taught him a lesson. Harriet's jaw tightened. Another piece of data to file away, another sign that the Vipers were systematically pressuring people. She convinced him to let Dr. Patel photograph his injuries for documentation. Travis reluctantly agreed, but only after Harriet assured him that dozens of others were also stepping up to report harassment. He wasn't alone anymore. That evening, Harriet met up with Ed and Deputy Lopez at Rhodes's Fuel and Service to share the new intel. "They're definitely picking targets who are isolated," Harriet said, her frustration evident. "Ranch hands, shift workers, people leaving late at night. They catch them off guard away from the cameras." Ed, leaning against the counter, scowled. "Damn, that means they're paying attention to where we've put up cameras and adjusting accordingly." Deputy Lopez nodded. "We need better coverage in the outlying areas, but that means more resources. We can't just plant cameras on every telephone pole in the county." A moment of heavy silence settled among them. Harriet recalled how, during her tours, insurgents often shifted their strategies the moment the military set up new checkpoints. It was a cat-and-mouse game, with each side adapting. The difference here was that Harriet had far fewer official tools at her disposal, and the Vipers were adept at blending into the highways that crisscrossed Texas. Still, Harriet wasn't one to dwell on the negative. "Then we adapt," she insisted. "We can create a rotating schedule of volunteers to check remote roads, especially around dusk. Pair them up, one with a camera, one with a phone for immediate calls. Keep rotating. Make it so the Vipers never know who's watching or when." "Thus, sir." Deputy Lopez jotted down Harriet's ideas and Ed nodded firmly. "We'll do it," he agreed. "I can talk to the ranchers. Maybe they can organize some folks. We'll need some pickups with good off-road capability." They worked out a plan into the late hours, sipping stale gas station coffee and writing down rosters of volunteers. Harriet forced herself not to think about how precarious it all still felt. She knew from experience that small victories could vanish in a single violent encounter if the aggressors decided to up the ante. But for the moment, the people of Lonesome Falls were rallying, and that spark of unity might just be enough to push back. Soon enough, Lonesome Falls witnessed small but telling results of its collective vigilance. A group of high school seniors, trained by Harriet in how to discreetly record encounters on their cell phones, captured footage of two bikers circling the edge of the school property. That footage was sent to Deputy Lopez, who forwarded it to the sheriff and, in turn, to the state authorities. Another time, Manny Johnson's newly installed security cameras caught a midnight prowler attempting to cut the store's power lines. The footage clearly showed a biker vest with the Red Viper emblem. The prowler fled when a volunteer watchman approached in a truck, headlights glaring. That same night, Harriet helped Dr. Patel treat a shaken Lucy Caldwell, who had stumbled into the clinic with bruises on her ribs. Lucy had closed her diner and was walking to her car when two men approached her, demanding to know if the courtesy fee had been paid on her behalf. Lucy refused to tell them anything. One of them shoved her against the car door, leaving her breathless on the pavement. They sped off when a neighbor's porch light switched on, a small example of how being observant and quick to respond made the Viper's strong-arm tactics riskier. Each new incident added more pieces to the puzzle. By midweek, Harriet had a thick folder of notes and screenshots. Deputy Lopez had compiled them into a single digital file to email to the Department of Public Safety. Sheriff Townsend stopped by Rhodes Station one afternoon, exhausted but hopeful. "They're finally listening," he told Ed and Harriet. State police say they're allocating some troopers to pass through town more often. Maybe we can squeeze them until they leave. Yet Harriet noticed that the tension only grew thicker. The Vipers were no longer just passing through. They had set up a makeshift camp in a decrepit warehouse on the outskirts of Lonesome Falls, well away from the main roads. Multiple sightings of bikes coming and going at odd hours confirmed their presence. Viper was still nowhere to be seen in person, but Harriet suspected he was orchestrating everything from the shadows. The next big move, she was certain, was on the horizon. And she was right. One night, close to midnight, Harriet was returning from the clinic after helping Dr. Patel with a minor emergency. She drove slowly down the quiet main street, the headlights illuminating empty storefronts and a stray dog loping along the sidewalk. A sharp turn took her onto a residential street lined with oak trees, their branches swaying in the wind. That's when her headlights caught the reflection of something metallic up ahead. Motorcycles, parked in a line against the curb. Her heart thudded. She counted 3 bikes, all unoccupied, each bearing the red Viper emblem. Easing off the gas, she grabbed her phone from the passenger seat to alert the volunteer watch. Before she could dial, 2 figures appeared from between the houses, a man and a woman, both in black leather jackets. Harriet's headlights lit them up, and they glared at her, clearly unhappy at being spotted. In that instant, Harriet had a choice. Slow down, confront them, or keep driving and call for backup. She recalled her own rule. No lone heroics. The rest of the community needed a chance to respond properly. So she drove on, heart pounding, phone in hand. Once she was safely out of sight, she pulled over, dialed Deputy Lopez, and reported the exact location. Within minutes, a text thread lit up with volunteer watchers mobilizing. Harriet circled back with headlights off, parking far enough away to observe. She watched as 2 trucks from local ranchers rolled up, shining high beams across the street. The bikers hopped on their rides and roared off into the night. No confrontation, no violence. But it was a small victory. The watchers had proven their rapid response, frustrating whatever the Vipers had planned. By the following weekend, Harriet's life had taken on a rhythm that felt more like a mission than small-town living. Mornings were spent checking in with Dr. Patel, afternoons coordinating with volunteers and reviewing newly captured footage, evenings updating the watch schedules. Ed's station became an unofficial command post, its back office papered with maps of the area, sticky notes marking sightings of the Vipers. Reggie diligently tracked the online reports, collecting images of graffiti tags and suspicious vehicles. Meanwhile, Harriet found herself in a peculiar position of local leadership. People who had never spoken to her before now approached her on the street to relay sightings or ask for advice on beefing up security. At first, Harriet felt overwhelmed by the attention. She was used to commanding hospital units, not an entire town, but her training in triage and organization translated well, and soon she managed the task with calm efficiency. One rainy afternoon, Harriet, Ed, and Deputy Lopez were huddled around the station's counter, poring over a map dotted with red pins. Each pin represented an incident or suspected biker sighting. Deputy Lopez tapped the western side of the map with her pen. "They're focusing a lot near the old railway tracks and the abandoned warehouses," she said. "Not surprising. That's where they can hide without being noticed as much. We've got them on camera near Pruitt's farm twice this week," Harriet added. "But they weren't harassing the owners directly. Maybe they're scouting the farmland for an approach into town that avoids the main roads." Ed nodded. "They want to move quietly, set up intimidation strikes. We'll have to watch those back roads, especially after dark." Just then, Reggie dashed in, phone in hand. "We got trouble," he announced breathlessly. "Hank Porter just posted on the group that his shop has been surrounded by 6 or 7 bikes. They're revving their engines, shouting for him to come out." Deputy Lopez cursed under her breath. "Let's go," she snapped, grabbing her jacket. "Harriet, Ed, stay here. I'll handle it." Harriet was already on her feet. "No, you'll need backup. And we have watchers stationed closer than we are here." She dialed a quick number, giving instructions for the volunteer watchers to converge safely near Hank's shop, just enough to record and observe without direct confrontation. Meanwhile, Deputy Lopez hopped into her squad car and sped off, siren blaring. Through the grainy cell phone footage posted live to the social media group, Harriet and Ed watched as a half-dozen black-clad bikers circled Hank's automotive shop. Their shouts were muffled by the engine noise, but Harriet could sense the aggression. The bikers were daring Hank to come out, threatening to damage the shop if no payment was made. All at once, a wave of onlookers, neighbors, volunteer watchers, began appearing from the dark corners around the shop, phones held high. The bikers seemed startled, their intimidation performance losing steam when they realized at least a dozen cameras were pointed their way. By the time Deputy Lopez arrived, lights flashing, the bikers were already mounting their rides, preparing to leave. Before they could vanish, she cut them off with her squad car. A tense exchange followed. No one could hear it over the footage, but Harriet guessed it involved the deputy making it clear their faces and plates had been documented, that more law enforcement would be involved. One of the bikers, Harriet realized with a jolt, was the same wiry man from the gas station confrontation. The man's eyes flicked about nervously, as though he wasn't as eager to pick a fight with a uniformed deputy and a crowd of watchers. In the end, the bikers drove off, engines howling in frustration. Hank's shop stood unscathed, saved by the town's rapid mobilization. Another small victory, Harriet thought with relief. But the tension was palpable. This was a test, a show of force meant to see if Lonesome Falls could be easily cowed. The Vipers now had proof that the town wouldn't break so easily. Harriet suspected that meant their next move would be bigger, perhaps more violent. And so she silently braced herself, and the town, for what would surely come next. 2 nights later, Harriet was awakened by a frantic call from Deputy Lopez. "They're massing at the old warehouse," the deputy said, voice trembling with urgency. "One of our watchers saw at least 10, maybe 15 new bikes arrive. If they decide to ride into town all at once, we're in trouble." Harriet flung off her blankets and rushed to switch on the lamp by her bedside. Her small rental house felt too large, too empty, as she pulled on her boots and grabbed a light jacket. Through her window, she could see the distant glow of headlights flickering across the horizon. It was nearing midnight, and the quiet streets of Lonesome Falls lay still under a waxing moon. But she sensed the storm about to roll in. In a practiced flurry, Harriet called Ed, instructing him to open up the station and activate the emergency radio net. She texted Manny Johnson and Hank Porter, alerting them to the potential threat. Within minutes, the volunteer watchers had the message, each one lighting up the phone tree to warn their neighbors. Harriet jumped into her truck, adrenaline surging with every breath, images of combat tours flashing in her mind, the swirl of dust from chopper blades, the howling klaxons, the frantic triage in the aftermath of mortar attacks. Now in a quiet Texas town, that same sense of urgency filled the air. Driving into the heart of Lonesome Falls, Harriet passed houses where lights were flicking on one by one. In some yards, she spotted silhouettes stepping onto porches, phones in hand, scanning the streets. At Rhodes's Fuel and Service, she found Ed and Reggie hunched over a table strewn with maps, a portable police scanner crackling with static, and occasional updates from Deputy Lopez. Reggie looked up, pale but resolute. "Reports coming in from the north side, he said. Motorcycles splitting into smaller groups, heading toward the school and the diner." Harriet nodded, her mind racing through the best defensive approach. The Vipers were likely trying a pincer move, hitting multiple spots at once to stretch resources thin. "Alert watchers to hold positions, gather video, but not to engage," she instructed. Then she glanced at Ed. "I'll head to the school. You handle coverage at the diner. We don't know if they're aiming to vandalize or if they plan on a full-on confrontation." Ed's eyes hardened, but he nodded, picking up his shotgun as he headed for his pickup. Harriet realized how unthinkable it would have been just weeks ago for an elderly gas station owner to stand against a biker gang. But this was the new Lonesome Falls, united and unwilling to roll over. As Harriet pulled away from the station, her thoughts churned. She recalled the heated arguments she'd overheard among doctors in Baghdad about whether to stay in a high-risk area to help civilians or evacuate. Some left out of self-preservation, others stayed and saved countless lives. Harriet had stayed. That same question loomed here. Stay or run? But Harriet already knew her answer. She wasn't running from Lonesome Falls. This place had become her home, and the people had become her friends. She would stand with them, come what may. The rev of distant engines drew closer, resonating through the dark. Headlights flickered at the periphery of every street. Harriet's truck rumbled onto the main road leading to the school, where she could already see shadows moving in the parking lot. Through the tinted windows of her cab, she spotted at least 5 riders. Her heart pounded, but her hands stayed steady on the wheel. She was no stranger to fear. She'd simply learned how to keep moving through it. Tonight, it seemed, would be the ultimate test. Lonesome Falls had prepared for this moment, forging a network of watchers, cameras, and community resolve. The question was whether it would be enough to weather the violent tempest heading their way. Harriet Clark drove through the dark streets of Lonesome Falls with her headlights off, her pulse a steady thrum in her ears. The school was only a few blocks from Rhodes' Fuel and Service, but the roads felt unusually long tonight, fraught with possibility. She checked the rearview mirror. No one following yet. A handful of times she thought she saw the flicker of motorcycle lights or heard the distant purr of an engine, but it might have been her imagination primed by weeks of tension. She ran a hand across her tired eyes, trying to push away the fatigue that weighed on her after so many nights spent on high alert. When the school's low, boxy buildings came into view, Harriet slowed, scanning the shadows in the parking lot. She spotted 4 motorcycles parked off to one side, engines still warm enough to throw off little curls of heat in the cool night air. The single security lamp cast an uneven glow, illuminating an empty basketball court. It would have been pitch black if not for the extra floodlights the school had installed at Harriet's urging. The problem was that the bikers knew how to skirt those lights, slipping into the blind spots. She saw them now, figures lurking in the half-dark near the chain-link fence around the playground. A quiet swirl of dread settled in her stomach. She grabbed her phone and tapped a quick message to the volunteer watch group. School lot. Multiple bikers. Observing from the entrance. Within moments, a flurry of acknowledgments appeared on her screen. Some watchers were less than 2 minutes away. Others, pinned down at different locations, might need longer. That was the system's strength. If a confrontation turned ugly, Harriet would never face it alone. The people of Lonesome Falls refused to let anyone stand by themselves, particularly not the nurse who'd helped them organize in the first place. Stepping out of her truck, Harriet kept the engine running in case she needed to maneuver quickly. She took a deep breath and walked into the school's parking lot, projecting the kind of collected calm she'd once used under mortar fire. At first, the bikers didn't seem to notice her approach. They were too focused on peering through the fence at the rows of windows facing the playground. Harriet guessed they might be scouting ways to break inside. Perhaps they wanted to vandalize the classrooms, maybe smash the cafeteria windows, or leave threatening graffiti on the walls. Whatever their goal, Harriet intended to cut it short before it began. "School's closed," she called, raising her voice above the rustle of the wind. "Go home." All 4 heads snapped toward her, eyes reflecting an almost feral gleam in the half-light. One of them, a woman with a shaved head and a snarling viper tattoo curling up her neck, let out a derisive laugh. "You lost, lady?" she asked, stepping forward in a languid, menacing stride. "We're just enjoying the night air. Entre nous." A tall man with broad shoulders and a mean-looking scar across his chin joined the woman, crossing his arms. His vest sported the same red viper emblem Harriet had come to know so well, the mark of the black vipers. It was clear they were spoiling for trouble, and Harriet had no illusions about how quickly intimidation could spiral into violence, yet she refused to yield ground. "Private property," Harriet said, jabbing a thumb at the school sign. "Principal Donahue has every right to press charges if you don't leave." She kept her voice steady, her body language calm, but her mind was a carousel of potential responses. Which one to target first if they rushed her, how quickly her backup might arrive, and whether these bikers had firearms. The woman with the viper tattoo smirked, exchanging a look with the tall man. "And who's going to stop us? Your Facebook group," she sneered. "We're just 4 friendly folks out for a stroll." Her sarcasm dripped onto the pavement, conjuring an image of how casual cruelty flourished when fear was the norm. Harriet felt a flicker of anger, but she tamped it down, reminding herself that reckless emotion could be fatal. A squeal of tires echoed behind Harriet. She glanced over her shoulder to see 2 pickups pulling in, headlights flooding the parking lot. She recognized the lead driver as Manny Johnson, the feed store owner. In the second truck sat a volunteer watch member Harriet barely knew by name, but had seen at the diner, Cassie, a rancher's daughter with a no-nonsense gaze. Both hopped out, phones already recording. The sudden light seemed to agitate the bikers, who shifted uncomfortably. "Looks like your audience arrived," Harriet observed, nodding at Manny and Cassie. The logic was simple. Criminals often hated having their faces on camera. Documenting each encounter robbed them of plausible deniability. Last chance. Either ride out peacefully or explain to the sheriff why you're lurking on school grounds after midnight. The tall man's arms remained crossed over his chest, muscles taut beneath the leather vest. Another biker, leaning near the fence, hissed under his breath, "This is a waste of time. Colt's not going to be happy if we bail." The mention of their leader's name, Colt Viper Stanton, sent a tremor of recognition through Harriet. She remembered him from the initial showdown at the gas station. Viper's underlings were clearly following some directive, likely testing how quickly the town could respond. Manny, camera still rolling, spoke up. "Back off, folks. We've already got your plates." He nodded at the row of bikes. "Those cameras see everything." The defiant note in his voice was a testament to how far Lonesome Falls had come. Only a month ago, Manny might have pretended not to see suspicious activity. Now he stood tall, calling them out, protected by the knowledge that Harriet and the rest of the community were behind him. The biker woman spat on the ground. "Fine," she snarled. "Y'all want to play watchman? Go ahead, but you can't be everywhere at once." She turned to the tall man, who gave a slight nod. Without another word, they stalked to their motorcycles, engines revving as they prepared to leave. A pang of anxiety slid through Harriet's chest. The last thing she wanted was to force a direct fight here, so close to the school. Kids and families might show up early in the morning for sports practice or weekend events. She had prepared the town to defend itself, but she also hoped to avoid bloodshed. She stepped aside, letting Manny's bright headlights cast the bikers in stark relief. One by one, they pulled away from the fence, kicked up their stands, and roared out of the parking lot. As their taillights disappeared into the surrounding streets, Harriet exhaled, shoulders loosening. Manny joined her at the center of the lot, giving her a cautious grin. "We got here fast," he remarked. "Seems like the system works." Harriet nodded, but the tension in her chest didn't fully ease. "Yeah, it works for now, but they'll keep testing. Let's keep eyes on that old warehouse. See if more show up tonight." Cassie, phone still in hand, murmured agreement. Harriet shot a final glance at the vacant space where the bikers had stood, feeling certain this was just another probe in the Viper's escalating campaign. While Harriet was chasing bikers away from the school, Ed Rhodes found himself in a parallel confrontation on the other side of town. He'd driven to Lucy Caldwell's diner right after leaving the station, suspecting that a second group of Vipers might be targeting it. The diner, known as Caldwell's Kitchen, was bathed in neon blue light from the retro sign flickering above the front windows. Usually at this hour, Lucy would be closing up alone, wiping down the counters before turning off the lights. Tonight, however, Ed arrived to see Lucy standing on the sidewalk, hands on her hips, staring down two leather-vested men with a mixture of rage and fear. "Stay back," Lucy called when she spotted Ed's pickup rounding the corner. One of the bikers had taken a crowbar from his saddlebag, letting it hang menacingly at his side. The other traced circles on the diner's plate glass window with a gloved fingertip, as though deciding where to start the damage. Ed's stomach twisted at the sight. The diner had been around as long as he could remember, one of the last classic eateries in the county. As Ed parked, Lucy backed up to stand near him. "They want me to pay up if I don't want the place trashed," she said under her breath, voice trembling with suppressed fury. "I told them to go to hell, but they're not budging." Ed reached into his truck's rack and pulled out a hunting rifle. Legal, registered, and something he rarely needed. The older man didn't like the idea of brandishing a gun on his own doorstep, but he wasn't about to watch the diner get smashed to pieces. "Gentlemen," he called in a calm, firm tone, "you're trespassing on private property. Best move along." The biker with the crowbar turned, eyebrows shooting up when he saw Ed's rifle. "Look at Grandpa, trying to be a hero," he drawled, not moving. Despite his mocking tone, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. It was one thing to intimidate a lone, unarmed woman, another to face an armed town resident broadcasting confidence. Lucy, who had her phone out to capture video, gave a shaky laugh. "Grandpa or not, he's got more sense than you. So why don't you leave before I call the sheriff?" Her voice was loud enough to carry across the quiet street. The second biker, still at the window, pressed a hand flat against the glass. "Sure you want that?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. "You and your buddy there might think you're tough, but you won't always be around when we come knocking." Ed's grip on the rifle remained steady. "We'll be around enough," he said. "Now put down that crowbar and get on your bike. You've made your point. We're not handing over a penny." A tense silence followed. Lucy's camera phone was angled at them, capturing every twitch and grimace. Ed held his breath, half expecting the biker to take a swing at the diner's window or lunge in some desperate move to save face. But just then, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. Perhaps it was the sheriff coming from yet another incident, or maybe Deputy Lopez had directed extra help to this area. Whatever the reason, the sound unnerved the bikers. They exchanged a quick, agitated look before stepping away from the diner. The one with the crowbar pointed it at Ed, a silent threat left hanging in the air. Then, with a bark of laughter, they mounted their motorcycles and revved out of sight, leaving only the acrid smell of exhaust behind. Lucy let out a gasp, shoulders shaking. Ed exhaled in relief, lowering his rifle. "Thank you," Lucy murmured, eyes shining with both fear and gratitude. "I was worried." Ed nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We protect our own here. That's all there is to it." But deep down, he shared her unease. This night felt like a turning point. The Vipers were no longer content with subterfuge. They were taking bigger risks, pressuring more people in one sweep. The question was, how much more would they escalate before they backed off, or forced the town into a final showdown? By the time Harriet and Ed reconnected at Rhodes Fuel and Service, dawn was breaking. Exhausted volunteers who had spent the night bouncing between hotspots around town filtered in for coffee, bleary-eyed but relieved nobody was seriously hurt. Reggie handled the caffeine distribution, pouring cups from a massive thermos while Manny tapped away on his phone, entering the night's incidents into a shared database. Every detail counted: who saw the bikers, what time, which direction they arrived from, and how they departed. Sheriff Townsend showed up, hat askew, uniform jacket wrinkled. He'd been up all night responding to one call after another. Deputy Lopez, equally haggard, brought in a laptop containing footage from at least 3 different angles of the confrontation at the diner and the school. "We've sent everything to the state police," she told Harriet, wiping sweat from her brow despite the early morning chill. "They're taking it seriously now, but it might still take time for them to deploy resources." Harriet understood the subtext. In many rural areas, state or federal help could be delayed by bureaucratic red tape or a shortage of personnel. "We'll handle it until then," she said quietly. She glanced at Ed, who looked weary but determined. Everyone else in the station wore similar expressions, tired but steadfast. Lonesome Falls, as Harriet had come to see, might be small and unassuming, but its community was forged from stubborn grit. Outside the store's wide windows, the sky glowed pink and orange, heralding a new day. Harriet rubbed her aching neck. She'd caught only a few hours of sleep the past several nights, and her body reminded her she wasn't in a combat zone anymore. She was supposed to be resting, recuperating. Instead, she had stepped into another kind of battle, this time not as a medical provider, but as a community organizer and occasional deterrent. She wondered whether she'd ever truly leave the shadow of war behind. "Harriet," Manny called, waving her over to the map he'd spread across a side table. "We've got a real cluster of sightings near the high school, the diner, and the old mill in the same 3-hour window. Looks like they're probing our response times in different parts of town." He pointed out arrows drawn onto the map with a red marker. "If they keep pushing, we'll be juggling calls until we make a mistake." Harriet sighed, tapping her finger near the warehouse district on the east side. "I'm worried about this area. They have a perfect hideout there. We might need watchers posted full-time, but that's a huge commitment. People have jobs and families." Deputy Lopez chimed in. "Maybe we set up a rotation. My boss is pulling in a retired deputy for extra help. He can at least do some driving around those areas." "Suckum." Across the room, Lucy Caldwell entered with 2 trays of pastries from her diner, her way of saying thanks to the volunteers for helping last night. Ed winked at her as she set them down, a silent acknowledgement of their shared relief that her place wasn't trashed. Outside, a few local teens jogged by, curiosity on their faces drawn by the unusual bustle at the gas station this early. Harriet offered them a wave, encouraging them to move on rather than hover. Nobody wanted the teenagers in the crossfire if things escalated. "Let's finalize the watch schedule for the next few days," Harriet said, returning her attention to the map. We'll keep the phone tree primed, and if the Vipers try something coordinated again, at least we'll be ready. Though the group collectively agreed on an action plan, Harriet couldn't shake the prickling sense that something bigger was brewing. The Vipers hadn't tested them with overwhelming force yet. Each time they'd use small groups scattered around town to gauge how quickly or effectively people responded. Harriet suspected it wouldn't be long before Colt Viper Stanton himself led a larger, more dangerous assault. A final push to break the town's spirit before the state police or outside help could arrive. As midday arrived, the harsh Texas sun blazed overhead, making the town's newly installed security cameras glint along rooftops like tiny mirrors. Harriet drove around Lonesome Falls, checking in on several business owners. Some had begun reinforcing their windows, while others installed better locks or additional lighting. At the high school, Principal Donahue escorted Harriet through the corridors, explaining how a handful of teachers and staff now acted as safety monitors, patrolling the grounds after hours. Outside, Harriet noted the children playing during lunch break, running across the grassy field. The carefree laughter brought a lump to her throat. She'd seen too many places overseas where kids couldn't attend school without fear of mortar attacks or militant raids. Lonesome Falls was still a far cry from a war zone, but Harriet knew complacency was dangerous. If the Vipers got their way, the entire town would cower. Principal Donahue led Harriet to the new storage closet, newly repurposed into a mini security hub. 2 donated monitors displayed feeds from cameras around the school's perimeter. "We captured a group of bikers last week circling the lot," Donahue said, pointing to footage stored on a flash drive. "We made copies for the sheriff. We're not messing around anymore." Harriet nodded approvingly. "Good. If they realize you have cameras, hopefully they won't try to do something reckless here. Schools are off limits in most folks' moral code, but that doesn't mean it'll stop them. Keep an eye out after dusk." After leaving the high school, Harriet visited Hank Porter's auto shop, scene of last night's near showdown. Hank was out front, polishing a newly installed steel gate that he'd welded to protect the shop's main entrance. He eyed Harriet's approach with a mixture of relief and lingering worry. "Heard about your run-in at the school. Thanks for holding the line," he said, shaking Harriet's hand. "Between you and Ed, I reckon you saved the diner and the school from a heap of trouble." Harriet shrugged. "We all did our part. Manny and Cassie showed up in record time. Our watchers are the real heroes." She paused, noticing Hank's tools scattered around. "Reinforcing the door?" He nodded grimly, wiping sweat from his brow. "I figure a sturdy gate might slow him down. Already replaced a few windows with reinforced glass. It's expensive, but cheaper than letting them smash everything. My biggest worry is if they come in a big group, like a stampede. That gate might not hold." Harriet understood his unease. These incremental measures felt like preparing for a storm that could turn catastrophic any moment. "We're building a case," she reminded him. "Every incident is documented. Every threat is reported. The state police are watching, and once they have enough to justify a crackdown, I'm hoping we can put this behind us." Hank managed a half smile. "You might have turned this town into a fortress. Didn't think that was possible." "It's not a fortress," Harriet corrected gently. "Just a community that won't bow to intimidation anymore." She took her leave, mind spinning with the same questions that kept returning. How long before the final showdown? How many more nights of scattered intimidation would it take before Viper decided to turn up the heat? Harriet drove back toward the station, noticing the newly reinforced diner windows, the feed store's upgraded perimeter lights, the extra patrol car near the old railway tracks. In her rearview mirror, she spotted a motorcycle about a block behind, following at a leisurely pace. Her heart rate quickened, but she kept her composure, refusing to let them see any sign of fear. Harriet spent the next several days in a state of uneasy watchfulness. Each morning she checked in with Ed and Reggie at Rhodes's Fuel and Service, going over any new reports or footage. She would then make her rounds, stopping by the diner, the auto shop, the school, and occasionally driving out to the farmland on the outskirts of town where several ranchers had reported suspicious bikes. Her phone seldom stopped buzzing with updates from the volunteer watchers or questions from anxious residents. Even with this heightened vigilance, the Black Vipers continued their harassment. One evening, a group of them tore through an empty subdivision site, spray painting the Red Viper emblem on half-built walls and leaving behind broken glass. Another time they ambushed an out-of-town truck driver near the highway rest area, though the driver managed to speed off before they could extort him. Each incident felt like a fresh assault on the town's morale. But Harriet noticed something else. The Vipers rarely stuck around once watchers arrived. They fled the cameras, the recordings, the possibility of facing real legal consequences. Deputy Lopez drove by Harriet's place one afternoon, windows rolled down, scowling at her notepad. "We keep building a case, but it's all scattered," she lamented. 30 different small crimes, no major felonies, except for assault on Travis Cole. That's still under investigation. The higher-ups want something bigger, conspiracy or racketeering, before they move. Harriet pressed her lips together, frustration swelling. "So we keep waiting for them to do something worse? That's a hell of a policy." Lopez shook her head. "I know, but that's how the system works sometimes. We need to tie these crimes together, prove leadership involvement, show an organized pattern. Keep documenting. Believe me, I hate waiting too." She gave Harriet a sympathetic nod and drove off, leaving Harriet stewing in her own thoughts. Shortly after, Harriet went to Dr. Patel's clinic for a scheduled shift, using her nursing skills to treat sprains, check up on expectant mothers, and handle the usual minor emergencies that popped up. In her downtime, she and Dr. Patel discussed how the Vipers might escalate. Patel worried about hostage situations or severe injuries if the gang decided to send a more violent message. Harriet couldn't dismiss the possibility. She'd seen enough in combat to know a cornered, desperate group might strike out viciously. That night, Harriet lay awake in bed, replaying the day's events in her mind. The memory of a battered Lucy Caldwell or the bruises on Travis Cole's arms haunted her. She thought of the sweet old couple who ran the antique shop near the courthouse. How frightened they looked when Harriet suggested they install a camera. She recalled the teenagers at the high school, bravely manning their phone cameras yet not fully grasping the danger. Harriet tossed and turned, as she had done many nights after returning from Iraq, her thoughts rife with what-ifs. In the darkness, the quiet hum of Texas crickets offered scant comfort. A text from Manny arrived around midnight, jarring her out of a half-sleep. "Warehouse movement. At least 6 bikes just rolled in." Harriet responded quickly, letting the watchers know to stay alert. She sat up in bed, checking the phone tree updates. No immediate calls for help, just the usual sightings. She exhaled slowly, wondering if the Vipers were planning a new strategy. If this lull in direct confrontation was temporary, the next storm might be bigger than ever. Sure enough, the peace broke the following day. Harriet was at the clinic helping Dr. Patel change wound dressings on a patient with a nasty cut when her phone buzzed relentlessly. Reggie's frantic voice message crackled through. "They're at the feed store. Manny's in trouble." Harriet practically dropped the gauze, apologizing swiftly to her patient and Dr. Patel before sprinting to her truck parked outside. Her adrenaline surged, heart pounding as she sped across town. When she arrived at Johnson's feed supply, the parking lot was a chaos of dirt clouds, scattered tools, and the stench of burning rubber. At least 7 bikes were lined up near the entrance, and Manny lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder. 2 bikers hovered over him, one with his foot pressed against Manny's back, pinning him down. Harriet jumped out of her truck, phone at the ready, capturing the scene even as she barked, "Get off him, right now!" Her eyes flicked to Manny's face, twisted in pain, but resolute, into the stack of feed bags strewn across the ground. It looked like Manny had tried to defend his property and ended up assaulted. Another presence caught her attention, a tall figure stepping out from behind a tractor display. It was Colt Viper Stanton himself, broad, imposing, with a vest that bore more patches than the others, and a coiled Viper emblem in blood-red thread across the back. Harriet recognized him from the original showdown at Rhodes Station, but something in his demeanor was different now, calmer, colder, as though he'd shed any pretense of courtesy. "Ah," Viper said, smirking as he caught sight of Harriet. "Our brave nurse. We've been wanting to talk." He nodded at his men who grudgingly let Manny scramble away, though the rancher remained doubled over, breath ragged. Harriet's grip on her phone tightened. "You'll do your talking in jail if you don't get out of here," she retorted, her voice strained with anger. She spotted Manny's phone lying nearby, likely knocked away during the scuffle. Viper chuckled darkly. "I don't think so. You've been a thorn in our side for weeks, stirring up these yokels with your cameras and your watch groups. I'm here to collect, and Manny here owes us for some overdue fees." He gestured to Manny, who spat a mouthful of dirt, wincing as he tried to stand. Keeping her phone camera trained on Viper, Harriet eased closer, ready to help Manny. "We don't pay extortion here. You're wasting your time." Viper's grin never faltered. "Are we? See, I've heard your little group thinks they've won, chasing off my boys with cameras and phone calls. But how many times can you do that? How many watchers can you rally before people get tired? Let their guard down." He moved like a man confident in his power, but Harriet noticed tension roiling beneath his bravado. Perhaps frustration that the town hadn't bent to his will as easily as he'd expected. "I've got more watchers on the way," Harriet warned. Already she heard the growl of approaching engines that weren't motorcycles. At least 2 trucks and a patrol car would be there in moments. "You'll be surrounded on camera with a bruised Manny as evidence of assault. Even if you run, the state police will know exactly where to find you. You sure you want that on your record?" Viper glanced around, lips curling in distaste. Harriet could sense the other bikers growing edgy. Some cast nervous looks at the dusty road leading in from town. The intimidation game lost some luster when faced with real consequences. "We'll manage," Viper growled. He jerked his head at the men, who started walking back to their bikes. "Just remember, this is far from over, nurse." Harriet moved to Manny's side, helping him stand, glaring at Viper as the bikers revved their engines. Manny coughed, spitting blood onto the ground, but his eyes shone with defiance. In seconds, the horde of motorcycles thundered off, leaving only swirling dust and the stench of their exhaust. Moments later, Deputy Lopez's patrol car screeched into the lot, followed by 2 volunteer trucks. Harriet lifted Manny's arm around her shoulder, guiding him toward the clinic. A faint shiver crawled up her spine. Viper's calm menace felt more ominous than the random lash-outs by his followers. She suspected he had reached a boiling point. Now it was only a matter of time before he unleashed the full force of his anger on Lonesome Falls. That afternoon, the feed store assault became the talk of the town. As Manny nursed his injured shoulder, fortunately no broken bones, just a severe bruise, Harriet convened an emergency meeting at Rhodes's Fuel and Service. The back office was crowded with all the key figures: Ed, Reggie, Deputy Lopez, Dr. Patel, Lucy Caldwell, Hank Porter, and a handful of ranchers who'd witnessed the aftermath. Sheriff Townsend arrived midway, bleary-eyed yet determined, a sheaf of paperwork tucked under one arm. "We can't keep waiting for these random attacks," Harriet said, pacing in front of a whiteboard. She'd erased the usual map to free up space for a new plan. "Viper came himself this time, and that means he's planning something bigger soon." He practically admitted it. Deputy Lopez nodded, arms folded. "He's on thin ice legally. We've got Manny's testimony, plus footage Harriet captured. But we still need a strong, cohesive case to lock him up. My guess is he'll either leave town to avoid the heat or try one final move to show he's in charge." Hank spoke up, eyes flashing with urgency. "What if that final move is vandalizing half the town or worse, burning down the diner or the feed store? We need to protect these places." A chorus of agreement rose around him. Harriet tapped a marker against the whiteboard. "We need a coordinated defense," she said. "No more scattered watchers. A schedule so tight that if the bikers come in, they can't slip through the cracks. And if they launch a big offensive, we want them to realize half the town is ready to film and alert the authorities." They hashed out details. Manny's feed store would get an overnight guard rotation of volunteer ranchers who used their trucks as mobile watch platforms. Lucy's diner had a new alarm system, and Hank's auto shop staff agreed to rotate coverage through the night as well. Dr. Patel volunteered to keep her clinic open for any emergencies, a subtle but important message that the community would treat injuries quickly if violence escalated. Reggie spread out a map on the desk, showing possible routes from the warehouse district. "We'll position watchers on these roads," he said, pointing to thick black lines. "We can use short-range radios so we're not relying solely on cell towers. If the Vipers come in force, we'll know as soon as they hit the outskirts." Ed leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He glanced at Harriet. "You keep track of the big picture. Coordinate from here. You've got a knack for this strategic stuff. I'll roam around as backup if any watchers need help." A hush followed his statement. Harriet felt the weight of expectation resting on her shoulders. She'd never intended to become the town's de facto commander, yet here she was, using her combat nursing experience to guide an entire population. And they trusted her. The recognition glowed in every set of eyes in the cramped back office. With a slow nod, Harriet accepted the role. All right, let's finalize watchers, schedules, and contingencies. If Viper tries to split us up with multiple distractions, we can't afford to be scattered. As they worked, the sun angled lower in the sky, painting the station windows with fiery orange. Lucy, wearing a worried crease in her brow, provided quick sandwiches to keep everyone fueled. Sheriff Townsend got on the phone with state police again, relaying the day's developments. When he hung up, his troubled expression confirmed what Harriet suspected. Backup remained delayed, with no clear timetable. Whatever was about to happen in Lonesome Falls, they would face it largely on their own. They wrapped up as dusk arrived. Harriet stepped outside, feeling the oppressive weight of the warm evening air. Crickets chirped, and the silhouette of the water tower stood dark against the twilight sky. There was no telling whether the Vipers would strike tonight, tomorrow, or next week. But Harriet knew one thing for certain. Lonesome Falls wouldn't break under intimidation. The real question was how high the cost would go before this was over. Night fell like a velvet curtain across the Texas plains, bringing a hush that felt almost deceptive to the tense residents of Lonesome Falls. Harriet took her post at Rhodes's Fuel and Service, where Reggie had rigged a makeshift command center in the back office. A large table held multiple tablets streaming camera feeds from around town. Another corner boasted a portable radio set connected to watchers stationed at Manny's feed store, Hank's auto shop, Lucy's diner, the high school, and Dr. Patel's clinic. It was a patchwork solution, but Harriet felt a surge of pride at how quickly the town had adapted. An hour passed, then two. Reports trickled in of suspicious bikes roaming the outskirts, but nothing major. Harriet sipped coffee, ignoring the heaviness in her eyelids. A small TV in the corner glowed softly, tuned to a local news station, which ironically ran a feature on rising biker gang activity in the county. Harriet glanced at the screen, half listening to a reporter talk about how local law enforcement was overwhelmed. No kidding, she mumbled to herself, scanning the feeds. Midnight arrived, and Harriet switched radio channels to check on each watcher. Manny's low voice crackled in, saying all was quiet. Lucy chimed in that only one or two stragglers had shown up for late-night pie before heading home. Hank reported the all-clear near his shop. A sense of relief briefly flickered in Harriet's chest. Maybe the Vipers were lying low. Yet her instincts warned her not to relax. The tension in the air remained as thick as a thundercloud before lightning strikes. Sometime after 1 a.m., Harriet's phone vibrated with an incoming call. She snatched it up, heart thumping, when she saw it was a local rancher, Miguel Perez, stationed on a rural road to watch for incoming bikers. Harriet, Miguel whispered urgently, I count maybe 15 bikes heading south from the old warehouse. They're riding with lights off. Adrenaline jolted Harriet awake. Keep your distance, don't engage, she instructed, motioning to Reggie to mobilize the watchers. Where exactly? Miguel rattled off a location near the battered train tracks. They're coming in fast. Looks like they might split up. Harriet turned to the radio set, her voice projecting calm but urgent authority. All watchers be advised, multiple bikes inbound from the east. Numbers possibly 15 plus. Lights off. Prepare for coordinated entry. Stay at your posts unless directed. She scanned the camera feeds from Manny's store, the diner, the high school, and Hank's shop. The roads appeared still, a few street lamps illuminating empty sidewalks. But if the Vipers truly intended to swarm, they could converge on multiple targets at once, forcing watchers to scatter. Harriet's mind raced, recalling the cat-and-mouse battles in Iraq where insurgents struck decoy targets to lure defenders away from the real objective. Reggie, loop Deputy Lopez in, Harriet ordered, tapping her pen against a notepad. Tell her we need patrol cars ready on the east side. We should have watchers converge on the likely routes into town. Minutes ticked by, excruciating in their slowness. Through the radio, Harriet heard watchers quietly confirming their positions. Diner locked. Lights on. No activity yet. Feed store clear. High school gate secured. Then Manny's voice tense and clipped. We've got movement on Route 2. 6 bikes, possibly more behind them. Harriet zoomed in on the feed store's camera. The darkness revealed a row of headlights materializing near the road. A second monitor showed a different group of bikes approaching the auto shop area. "They're splitting," Harriet muttered, "trying to force us to stretch thin again." But this time the watchers were prepared. Harriet relayed instructions, telling Lucy's watchers to stay put, while a separate group hurried to back up Hank's location. Meanwhile, Manny's feed had dedicated eyes. If the bikers tried a three-pronged approach, the watchers would respond as planned. "Harriet, phone call," Reggie hissed, pushing the mobile toward her. It was Lucy. "Bikes coming down Main Street," she said, her voice taut. "At least 5 or 6. They're heading toward me. I see them outside the diner right now." Harriet swallowed hard, scanning the cameras in a flurry. "Hold tight. Backup's on the way." She toggled the radio, voice calm despite her hammering heart. "Teams 4 and 5, head to Lucy's diner immediately. Cameras rolling. Keep your distance. Do not engage unless necessary. Surmenin." The surge of raw energy and tension crackled like electricity in the small command center. Multiple groups of bikers were converging, and Harriet was the linchpin, directing watchers to each potential flashpoint. She only prayed the plan would hold, that the cameras and numbers would deter the Vipers from outright violence. If not, Harriet feared, this night could end in bloodshed. Outside, the engines grew louder, echoing through the deserted streets of Lonesome Falls. Harriet stepped away from the monitors long enough to peer through the station's front windows. She spotted a cluster of headlights passing 2 blocks away. Her nerves thrummed with battle-ready tension. In a war zone, she would have known exactly what to do. Secure triage sites, prepare medevac routes, keep a team of medics on standby. Here it was a fragile network of volunteers against a motorcycle gang thirsting for dominance. The radio on the desk crackled with overlapping voices. "There's a group of 4 at Manny's entrance," someone reported, breathless. "They're revving engines, yelling they want him outside." Another voice cut in. "Hank's shop just got hit with bottles. Molotov cocktails? Unsure. Fire in the back lot." Harriet's pulse spiked. Actual fire meant they were escalating beyond intimidation. Then Lucy's tense update. "They're banging on the diner doors. I've locked everything. Where's backup?" This was it, Harriet realized. The orchestrated assault they'd been dreading. She caught Ed's eye. He stood near the door, shotgun ready, mouth set in a hard line. "Let's do it," he said, voice calm. "I'll take a crew to Manny. You coordinate here." Harriet nodded, letting him go. Part of her wanted to join him. She hated delegating, but her role as coordinator was crucial. She had to keep the puzzle pieces moving in unison. Rushing into the fray might leave watchers without leadership, and that could be fatal. Still, watching him drive off, rifle propped against the passenger seat, spiked her anxiety tenfold. The phone rang again. It was Manny, almost shouting over the roar of engines. "They're trying to tear down my fence. I can't hold them off alone." Harriet recognized fear, and also a deep, burning anger. Manny had always been mild-tempered, but these attacks cut right to his pride and livelihood. "Hold your position," Harriet urged. "Ed's on the way with at least 3 others. Keep filming if you can. Don't confront them head-on." As she ended the call, Deputy Lopez burst through the station door, hair windblown, uniform stained with sweat. "They're at the diner in force," she reported urgently. "I just came from the north side. Another group is heading toward the high school. They're launching simultaneous strikes." Harriet inhaled slowly, meeting the deputy's eyes. "All right, we stick to the plan. Encourage watchers to circle the high school and call in more folks. The cameras will do their work, and we flood them with numbers. We've got to keep them from setting fires or hurting anyone." Her voice held firm, though her stomach churned with dread. Outside, the wail of sirens broke through the cacophony of revving engines. Somewhere in the distance, Harriet spotted flickers of orange flame in the night sky. Hank's shop, possibly. She prayed the watchers arrived with extinguishers in time. The entire town was a tapestry of urgent calls, frantic movement, and defiant stands against the bikers' aggression. Through it all, Harriet stood at the center, dispatching watchers and responding to calls, phone in one hand, radio in the other. She thought back to her days in a military hospital tent, orchestrating triage for dozens of wounded soldiers. The chaos then had been deafening, bloody, and heartbreaking. Here the setting was different, but the essence remained. Keep calm, coordinate resources, and never let fear paralyze you. Lonesome Falls needed that iron composure now, more than ever. The night sky above Lonesome Falls glowed eerily with the reflection of distant flames. Harriet Clark stood in the makeshift command center at Rhodes's Fuel and Service, sweat beading on her temple despite the cool desert air drifting in from the plains. The tension was immense, every breath a conscious effort to keep calm. Phones rang, radios crackled, and the grim cadence of reports reached her ears in dissonant waves. "We've got a fire in Hank's back lot," came a panicked voice over the radio. "Someone tossed Molotov cocktails. We're trying to douse the flames, but they keep throwing more bottles from the street." Harriet clenched her jaw. "Keep your distance. Use the extinguishers first. I'm sending more people your way." She turned to Deputy Lopez, who was hovering near the door, face pale but resolute. "Grab 2 volunteers with trucks carrying extra water containers and head to Hank's. I'll hold down the fort here." Lopez gave a curt nod and dashed outside. Even as the door banged shut, the phone on Harriet's console lit up with another frantic call. Manny Johnson's voice poured out, thick with desperation. "I'm pinned down inside my feed store, Harriet. They've smashed through part of the fence. Ed and some of the ranchers are out there, but the Vipers are circling on bikes and yelling. They're trying to bait us into a fight." Harriet's heart hammered in her chest. "Stay inside. Keep your cameras rolling if it's safe. We're mobilizing more watchers to your location." She tried to keep her voice level, but anxiety coiled in her gut, threatening to unravel her composure. The plan had been to avoid direct violence, yet the Vipers' all-out assault, complete with fires and smashing fences, was forcing people into corners. In the corner of the station's office, Reggie typed feverishly on his laptop, updating their live map of the town. Colored dots blinked ominously, red for confirmed Viper activity, green for watchers or deputy presence, yellow for potential fires. Harriet glanced over his shoulder, seeing clusters of red around Hank's auto shop, Manny's feed store, Lucy's diner, and now a new marker near the high school. Her eyes widened, and she immediately switched to the school camera feed. A group of bikers had lined their motorcycles in the faculty parking lot, revving engines in a chorus of mechanical snarls, headlights blazing. "Cameras show 4 or 5 Vipers at the school," Harriet said aloud. "I need watchers 3 and 4 to rotate there now." On her radio channel, 2 voices answered, ranchers stationed a few blocks away. They confirmed they were en route, prepared to film, and if necessary, help secure the campus. Harriet prayed that would be enough. The next few minutes blurred into a whirlwind of calls and commands. The faint glow on the horizon became a dull roar of flames, punctuated by sirens as the few volunteer firefighters, Lonesome Falls, had tried to respond. Harriet grabbed a set of binoculars and peered out the window. She could just make out the flicker of firelight in the distance. She thought of the many nights in Iraq when she'd bandaged wounded locals by lantern glow while tracer rounds lit the sky. Her pulse throbbed with a familiar urgency. This was a different battlefield, but it felt no less dire. She had to believe in the strategy they'd built. Cameras, watchers, and a united response. All they could do was stand firm, document every crime, and hope enough evidence would pile up to bring in the state police en masse. Tonight, the Black Vipers intended to intimidate and destroy. Tomorrow, Harriet vowed, they would face the fallout of a community that refused to cower. 20 minutes later, Harriet decided she couldn't stay cooped up in the command center. She delegated monitoring duties to Reggie, left him with clear instructions, and rushed outside to her pickup. The moment she stepped into the open air, the acrid scent of smoke assaulted her nostrils. An orange glow danced against the star-studded sky, pulsing from the direction of Hank's auto shop. She drove swiftly through the deserted streets, adrenaline pumping. Loose debris littered some roads, broken bottles, scattered trash cans, indicating the Vipers had already swept through. Even from a distance, she could see the dull reflection of flame on nearby buildings, sparking a wave of dread. If the fires spread, half the town could burn before morning. As she neared Hank's, Harriet slowed. A small knot of watchers was clustered behind 2 pickup trucks, the vehicles angled to provide partial cover. Across the lot, a row of motorcycles hissed and cooled, their riders nowhere in sight. Smoke billowed from the back of the shop, tinted with flashes of white light as watchers deployed fire extinguishers. Harriet hopped out, scanning for immediate danger. She spotted Deputy Lopez directing people to keep a perimeter, her face smeared with soot. "Lopez!" Harriet called. "Where are they?" Lopez coughed, waving smoke from her eyes. They torched some junked cars behind the shop and lobbed a few more bottles. Then they took off before we could catch them. Minimal property damage, but the smoke's nasty. Good thing the whole place didn't catch. Relief surged through Harriet, but it was short-lived. A frantic voice crackled from Harriet's radio. Lucy Caldwell, her tone trembling with terror. "They're trying to break in. They smashed the diner's windows, Harriet. I'm barricaded in the kitchen. Where is everyone?" Without a second's pause, Harriet turned to Lopez. "Can you finish up here?" she asked, voice clipped. Lopez nodded. Harriet ran back to her pickup, heart pounding once more. Lucy's diner was a few blocks away, near the center of town. If the Vipers had pried open the windows, they might be inside already. Lucy was alone and vulnerable. Racing over potholed streets, Harriet forced herself to breathe slowly, to harness the rush of fear. She recalled how, as a combat nurse, she'd confronted medical crises where minutes dictated life or death. Calm in chaos, that was her mantra. Tonight, ironically, her job had shifted from saving lives with bandages to protecting them with vigilance and cunning. When she finally arrived at the diner, two watchers' vehicles already stood out front, headlights shining onto the cracked facade. Broken glass lay scattered along the sidewalk, reflecting the neon glow of the diner's sign. Harriet parked haphazardly, jumped out, and spotted Lucy huddled near the door. She was shaking but visibly unhurt, aside from a few small cuts on her arms. The watchers, phones in hand, hovered protectively beside her. "Where'd they go?" Harriet asked, kneeling to check Lucy's trembling hands for deeper wounds. They ran off, jumped on bikes when they heard you all coming," Lucy stammered, tears in her eyes. "Two of them got a crowbar under the window frame and shattered it. They were yelling about burning me out if I didn't pay." Harriet's stomach lurched with a mix of anger and profound relief. At least Lucy was safe, physically, but the mental scars would remain, just like the shattered glass at her feet. "We've got you," Harriet murmured, urging her to let the watchers help. Yet the night was far from over. Another watcher's voice blared on Harriet's radio. "They're at Manny's feed store again. Shots fired." Harriet's blood ran cold. Gunfire was a drastic escalation. She shoved down her own panic, glancing at Lucy one last time. "We'll get you medical help if you need it. Stay here. Keep your phone on." Then Harriet sprinted back to her truck, cursing under her breath. This was exactly the scenario she'd feared all along. The Vipers pushing so hard that lethal force became a real possibility. It felt like stepping into a war zone when Harriet arrived at Manny's feed store. Flashing lights from two patrol cars strobed across the dusty parking lot, revealing a chaotic scene. Half a dozen bikes scattered near the fence line, some toppled as if abandoned in a rush. One of Manny's rancher friends crouched behind a truck's open door, rifle in hand, scanning for targets. And near the store's entrance, Manny knelt beside someone sprawled on the ground. The metallic tang of gun smoke hung in the air. Heart hammering, Harriet jumped out of her truck. "Is anyone hurt?" she called, pushing through the swirl of anxious watchers and ranchers. Manny lifted his head, face pale. "It's Ed," he said, voice shaky. "He got clipped by a bullet. Soniformation." Fear flared in Harriet's chest like a hot brand. She rushed to Ed's side, mind already flipping into medical mode. The older man lay prone, gasping softly, his hand pressed against a bleeding wound in his upper left arm. Harriet dropped to her knees, ignoring the confusion around them. She'd faced gunshot wounds countless times in combat hospitals. She knew the procedure by heart. "Ed, it's Harriet," she said, gently moving his hand to assess the bleeding. Crimson stained his sleeve, but the bleeding didn't look arterial. She needed to get the wound compressed, though. Tearing open her belt bag, she'd started carrying basic medical supplies again. She produced gauze and began applying firm pressure. "Stay with me, okay? This looks like it passed through your arm. Might not be too bad, but you need a hospital check." Ed winced but forced a grin. "I'm tough. Just a scratch," he muttered, eyes flicking around anxiously. "They pulled guns when we tried to block them. Harriet shushed him gently, her heart pounding at how this peaceful man had ended up with a bullet in him. Deputy Lopez is on her way. We'll get you to Dr. Patel's clinic or, if needed, an ambulance to the nearest hospital. She kept pressure on the wound, scanning the rest of his body for other injuries. Around them, ranchers and watchers were on high alert, guns trained on the perimeter. The patrol car's sirens wound down, and Sheriff Townsend stepped out, taking in the battered fence, the bullet casings scattered on the ground. Manny pressed a shaking hand against his temple, recounting what happened. The Vipers had shown up, demanded Manny come outside, and when Ed and the ranchers refused to let them storm the store, at least one biker fired a gun. Harriet's chest tightened. Gunshots meant the night's violence had crossed a grim threshold. Documentation and cameras were crucial, but those wouldn't stop bullets. "Sheriff," she called, still tending to Ed, "we need an ambulance, or I can drive him in my truck. He's stable, but he needs stitches." The sheriff reached for his radio, shouting instructions to dispatch. Deputy Lopez, breathless from sprinting the last few yards, knelt beside Harriet. "I've got a kit in my squad car," she said. "I can help." "Good. Let's get him bandaged enough to move," Harriet said, focusing on the makeshift triage. "Then we'll send him to Dr. Patel. She's set up for basic trauma." Ed winced again as they lifted him, but tried to maintain a brave front. "You watch out for the others," he rasped to Harriet. "Don't let them take the town." She gave his uninjured hand a firm squeeze, her eyes burning with anger and protectiveness. "Don't worry, Ed," she whispered. "They haven't won, not by a long shot." While Harriet and Lopez stabilized Ed, Manny and two ranchers recounted the gunfight in terse, shaken voices. The Vipers had arrived in force, at least 8 or 9 of them, led by Colt Viper Stanton himself. The bikers initially tried to ram through the feed store's fence, likely to intimidate Manny or trash the property inside. When Ed stepped in, calmly telling them to back off, someone pulled a gun and fired. The ranchers ducked behind vehicles and returned a warning shot into the air, more to scare the assailants than to start a firefight. But as soon as that gunfire echoed, the Vipers scattered, leaving 2 of their bikes behind in the rush to flee. "Never seen them so riled," Manny admitted, voice trembling with adrenaline. They were screaming about how this town needed to learn respect. Colt was furious, like a caged animal. Harriet, wiping her bloody hands on a spare rag after finishing Ed's bandage, mulled over Manny's description. A caged animal. That was an apt way to describe a gang leader backed into a corner. The cameras, watchers, and recorded crimes had built enough pressure that the Vipers feared real jail time. So instead of leaving quietly, they lashed out. Now the flashing lights of another patrol car lit up the road. Lopez's backup. More volunteers arrived, some armed, though Harriet instructed them sternly not to seek out confrontation. "Document everything," she repeated, her voice almost ragged. "No vigilante attacks. We don't need more bullets flying." Sheriff Townsend signaled Harriet to join him near the fence. He wore a grave expression, lines of fatigue etched across his brow. "We've found shell casings. I'll send them to the lab if we can get them processed. Might link the weapon to the shooter." He paused, scanning the carnage. "Ed's hurt. Manny's rattled. Property damaged, all over town." His gaze flicked up to Harriet's determined face. "We can't keep going like this, Harriet. If we don't get outside help soon, someone's going to get killed." She felt the weight of his words. She also recognized that the small rural sheriff's department was outmatched against a gang so willing to use force. Taking a shaky breath, she locked eyes with him. "I'll call the state police again. We have to show them this is no longer petty vandalism. It's attempted murder." Townsend sighed. "I'll do the same, but I tried that angle earlier tonight. They're stretched thin. Best we can hope for is a few troopers coming through eventually. Might be hours, might be tomorrow." Anger pulsed in Harriet's veins. For weeks, she'd watched Lonesome Falls transform, forging a remarkable defense with limited resources. Now the Vipers had answered by turning the town into a battlefield. Harriet recalled the helplessness she'd felt overseas when higher command ignored requests for reinforcements. She refused to let that happen here without a fight. "We keep up the guard. The watchers stay on alert," she said firmly. "If they come back, we document it, and we stand together. That's all we can do until the cavalry arrives." Townsend nodded grimly, muttering something about doing what he could. Harriet glanced at the abandoned Viper motorcycles, a silent testimony to the gang's desperation. She wondered if Colt Stanton would realize now that Lonesome Falls wouldn't fold, or if he'd regroup for an even more savage assault. Either way, Harriet intended to be ready. With Ed off for treatment, she felt more fiercely protective than ever. This fight had become personal. The Vipers wanted to dominate a vulnerable community, but they'd found instead a tight-knit town unified by a quiet, relentless resolve. And Harriet, the combat nurse who had vowed never to abandon people in crisis, stood at the epicenter, ready to confront whatever came next. Dawn broke with a murky red sky, as though reflecting the night's violence. The fires at Hank's shop were extinguished, though part of the back lot lay charred and smoking. Lucy's diner was boarded up where the glass window had been shattered, a bruise-like stain marring the cheerful neon lights. At Manny's feed store, the battered fence still bore the jagged evidence of a failed breach. The residue of gun smoke lingered in the morning air, mingling with the dusty scent of scorched land. Most of the town's residents, exhausted and shocked, drifted into the central street. Dr. Patel worked triage with Harriet, checking on those who'd inhaled smoke or suffered minor scrapes during the chaos. Ed had been taken to the clinic for stitches and a checkup, and Harriet planned to visit him soon. In every conversation, one question dominated. When will law enforcement clamp down on the Vipers? Sheriff Townsend stood by his patrol car, giving short updates to anxious townspeople. We're in contact with the state. They promised a bigger response team, he repeated wearily. In the meantime, keep your watchers organized and don't engage the Vipers if they return. Harriet fielded questions of her own. Could the town handle another assault? Would cameras and watchers be enough if Colt came back with guns blazing? She looked into the worried faces of small business owners, ranchers, teachers, and store clerks who all wore the same haunted expression. Lonesome Falls had done everything right, yet a bullet had already found Ed. Fear was only natural. Over at Dr. Patel's clinic, Harriet finally got to check on Ed. He lay in a narrow bed, his shirt cut away to reveal a clean dressing on his upper arm. Dr. Patel had stabilized him, confirming the bullet had passed through without fracturing bone. He'd need rest, antibiotics, and likely a few weeks of physical therapy, but he would heal. Relief washed through Harriet as she approached his bedside. Ed gave a tired grin. "Doc says I'll be fine," he rasped, voice tinged with painkillers. "Just can't hold a rifle for a while." Harriet forced a gentle smile, sitting in the chair beside him. "Don't worry, we'll manage. The town's come a long way." Ed's expression darkened. "They're not done, Harriet. You can see it in how they're acting, like wounded animals. They might regroup, strike again before the cops arrive." He let out a shaky breath, frustration etched in the furrow of his brow. "I hate lying here. Letting you all face this alone?" She reached for his hand. "You've done more than enough. Focus on healing. We're not alone. We've got watchers everywhere, and it's only a matter of time before the Vipers slip up and the authorities come down hard." His gaze lingered on her. "You really think we can hold them off again if they come loaded for war?" Harriet felt the weight of that question. Memories of past battlefields flooded her. Triage tents under mortar fire, communities on the verge of collapse. "I can't promise nobody else will get hurt," she admitted softly. "But I do know we have a plan and a bond stronger than anything they expected. We're not easy prey anymore." Ed's eyes gleamed with tears, partly from pain, partly from resolve. "You're good at this, you know." She squeezed his hand. "I just want to see this town safe." Rising, she promised to check on him later. As she left, she couldn't shake the nagging sense that the Vipers' final strike was drawing ever closer. They hadn't gathered so many men and weapons just to flee. Despite the exhaustion weighing on her, Harriet steeled herself. The defense of Lonesome Falls was far from over. That afternoon, Harriet and Deputy Lopez convened another emergency meeting, this time in the old community center near the courthouse. It was spacious enough to hold key townspeople without crowding them into a corner. Manny showed up with his arm in a sling from the scuffle at the feed store. Hank limped slightly from a bruise on his thigh, and Lucy wore bandages on her forearms. They were living testaments to how close the town had come to disaster the previous night. Harriet stood at the front, flanked by Lopez and Sheriff Townsend. She looked across the audience. Ranchers, store owners, teachers, retirees, and even a few teenagers. They all bore the same hardened glint of people who had been pushed to their limit and refused to yield. One teenager fiddled nervously with a video camera, another with a small drone Harriet had never seen before. The resourcefulness of the town never ceased to amaze her. Deputy Lopez addressed the group first, voice firm with a threat of urgency. "We've got confirmation from the state. They're sending additional troopers and possibly a SWAT unit within the next 24 to 48 hours. We don't know the exact timing, but help is finally on the way." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd, followed by tense murmurs about whether the Vipers would strike again before that help arrived. Sheriff Townsend cleared his throat. "Meanwhile, we keep doing what we've been doing, only better. The Watchers remain critical, especially on the outskirts. If we show weakness now, Colt Stanton might try one more big attack." Harriet stepped forward, scanning the weary but determined faces. "We need a final push to protect ourselves until the cavalry gets here. That means tightening our watch rotations for another day or two. I know everyone's exhausted. Many of you haven't slept much in the last week." She paused, letting that reality sink in. "But if we hold out a little longer, if we catch the Vipers in the act, we'll have bulletproof evidence for the state police. They won't just ride off scot-free." Manny struggled to his feet, his sling visible. "They shot Ed and tried to burn Hank out. They're escalating because they're cornered," he said hoarsely. "I say we get them on camera and on record. Show the world what they are. With that, we can bury them legally." Hank gave a gruff nod. Lucy offered a resolute thumbs up. Encouraged, Harriet outlined a final strategy. Watchers would work in tandem, with a buddy system to avoid anyone being taken by surprise. Those with camera drones, like the teen in the front row, would coordinate aerial surveillance of the roads leading from the warehouse. Manny's feed store would get extra reinforcements, as it had clearly become a prime target for the gang's intimidation. "Stay safe," Harriet concluded, voice resonating in the hushed hall. "We're not vigilantes. No one goes off looking for trouble. Let the Vipers come to us, and let the cameras roll. If they draw guns, call for help immediately. Don't be a hero. We've already got one person in recovery. That's one too many." The crowd dispersed, solemn but unified, each person shouldering a portion of the communal burden. Harriet felt a surge of pride for these ordinary folks who had turned fear into resolve. But underneath, a knot of dread tightened. She'd seen too many missions devolve in the final hours. The next day or two would be the hardest test yet. Nightfall brought a strange calm to Lonesome Falls, as if the entire town held its breath. The Watchers took their posts early. Floodlights illuminated areas like Manny's feed store, Lucy's diner, and Hank's auto shop. The school's perimeter cameras hummed, capturing every rustle of windblown leaves. In the distance, coyotes howled, a lonely sound underscoring the tension. Harriet stationed herself again at Rhodes Fuel and Service, where Reggie had reassembled the command center. They repeated the nightly ritual, checking each camera feed, scanning texts from watchers, updating a big chalkboard map in the corner. Deputy Lopez took a rotating patrol in her cruiser, occasionally radioing in to confirm certain roads were quiet. Dr. Patel stayed on standby at the clinic, assisted by a volunteer nurse from a nearby town who had heard about the crisis. For hours, nothing happened. Midnight passed in hushed vigilance. No roaring motorcycles, no flicker of headlights from the warehouse. Reggie glanced anxiously at Harriet. "Think maybe the Vipers got the message and slipped out of town?" he asked, voice tinged with hope. Harriet wasn't convinced. "Let's not assume. They may be waiting until the last moment, or they're planning something we can't see yet." Around 2 a.m. Harriet stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, trying to ease the ache in her shoulders. The faint glow of the station's neon sign washed over the empty pumps. Her mind drifted to the distant calls she'd had with the state police. "We're en route soon," they'd said. But how soon was soon? Suddenly, the sound of a single motorcycle engine pierced the stillness. Harriet tensed. The engine drew closer, echoing through the deserted side street. She quickly slipped back inside, motioning for Reggie to mute the chatter. Through the front windows, they spotted a lone figure on a motorcycle, coasting slowly past the station as if scoping it out. The glare of a street lamp fell across the rider's face. Colt Viper, Stanton himself. Harriet's stomach twisted. She grabbed her phone, whispering to Reggie, "He's alone, or at least appears to be. Let's not jump to conclusions. Alert watchers in the immediate area to keep filming, but not engage." Hep. A radio crackle confirmed watchers along Main Street had also seen Viper cruising by. Harriet eased closer to the window, carefully peeking out. Viper's expression was unreadable, hidden behind dark goggles. He paused near the station, engine idling, as if contemplating a final confrontation. Her heart pounded. The moment felt like a coiled spring. One twitch could set it off. Then with a roar, Viper accelerated away, disappearing into the night. Reggie exhaled shakily. "He's probably going back to the warehouse," he said, shoulders sagging with relief. Harriet stayed motionless, that same gnawing dread intensifying. Maybe Viper was testing them again, confirming watchers were still awake. Or maybe he was calculating how best to launch a final strike. She had no illusions that a lone drive-by meant the danger had passed. If anything, it heightened her suspicion. This was the calm before the storm, and they needed to be ready for the crash of thunder at any moment. Daylight found Harriet attempting to snatch a few hours of sleep on the cot in Rhodes's back office. Reggie dozed in a chair by the monitors, head bobbing whenever he drifted off. The abrupt clang of a door woke Harriet just after sunrise. Sheriff Townsend had arrived, hat in hand, his expression grim. She pushed herself upright, blinking away fatigue. "Morning, Sheriff. Any word from the state police?" He sighed, removing his hat to rub a hand over his thinning hair. "They're on their way. Troopers and a small tactical unit, apparently. But they're not here yet. Could be midday or later. I just hope we can keep the lid on until then." Harriet stood, wincing at the stiffness in her back. "How's the town?" "On edge but calm," Townsend replied. "No sign of big trouble overnight, other than Viper's little drive around town. He's reminding us he's still here." "Hamarnatronom," the sheriff hesitated, glancing out the window. "I can't shake the feeling we're in for one more show of force. Maybe he's planning to ambush the troopers." Harriet nodded. "We'll stay vigilant. If they haven't fled, they're likely doubling down. We can't let our guard down, not even for a second." After a quick splash of water on her face, Harriet took inventory of the updated watcher's schedule. Many had gone home to nap, replaced by fresh volunteers, but everyone remained on high alert. Lucy's diner had reopened, albeit with boarded windows, offering free coffee to watchers driving around on patrol. Hank resumed repairs on his back lot, warily scanning for suspicious bikers. Manny's feed store replaced its damaged fence with hastily hammered-in wood slats, guarded by ranchers who refused to let the Vipers breach the property again. Mid-morning arrived, bringing a wave of scorching heat. Harriet spent it ferrying water and snacks to watchers stationed at strategic intersections. She checked on Dr. Patel's clinic, where Ed was recuperating well enough to stand, though Dr. Patel sternly insisted he remain inside. Ed grumbled at his forced rest, but Harriet was grateful he wasn't in further danger. She let him know the plan was holding, that help was on the horizon, urging him to be patient. As the clock crept toward noon, Harriet fielded another round of updates. No major sightings of Vipers, no suspicious moves, but an odd sense of unreality gripped the town. It was too quiet, like the lull that sets in before the final gust of a hurricane. Deputy Lopez pulled Harriet aside near the gas pumps. "I'm going to circle the warehouse district," she said, "just to see if I can spot them packing up or preparing. Will you back me up?" Harriet nodded. "Let's be careful. We can bring a couple of watchers, keep our distance." She grabbed a radio and hopped into Lopez's squad car. The drive to the warehouse took them through deserted streets, boarded buildings and dusty lots. The structure itself loomed ominously at the edge of a cracked road. Faded graffiti, some Viper insignias, marked the corrugated walls. Lopez cut the engine, both women peering through the windshield. Harriet's pulse quickened. 2 or 3 motorcycles were parked near a side entrance, but there was no sign of the large group rumored to be inside. No engine noise, no chatter. It almost looked abandoned. Cautiously, they drove closer, watchers trailing in a pickup behind them. The door stood ajar. Harriet glimpsed empty crates, litter, and leftover beer bottles. Then her eyes snagged on something that made her skin crawl. A single red Viper emblem painted on the inside wall, huge and fresh, with the words "We're not done" scrawled beneath it in dripping black letters. Deputy Lopez cursed under her breath. They're gone, but they left a message. Harriet swallowed hard. Maybe the Vipers had moved out in the night, planning a final assault elsewhere, or escaping to regroup. Either way, the ominous phrase warned that this was no surrender. Harriet took pictures of the graffiti, documented the abandoned site, and quickly retreated. The watchers looked just as uneasy, scanning every corner with suspicion. Back in the squad car, Harriet closed her eyes for a moment, forcing herself to breathe. The Vipers weren't the type to vanish quietly. She could almost hear the drumbeat of impending confrontation. All she could do was keep the town braced until the promised state troopers rolled in and ended this nightmare for good. At 3 p.m., an intense summer sun bore down on Lonesome Falls. Harriet stood near the old courthouse, shading her eyes as she watched the horizon. Locals had gathered, whispering among themselves. Rumor buzzed that state troopers were just a few miles away. Tension rose like the oppressive heat. Some folks prayed for the cavalry to appear before the Black Vipers staged their final strike. Suddenly, the distinct rumble of motorcycles echoed through the air, distant but growing stronger. Heads turned. Harriet's heart thundered. She shared a look with Manny and Lucy, who stood nearby. If the troopers didn't get here in time, this might be it, the final face-off. A moment later, the watchers' radios exploded with urgent chatter. "Bikes on Main Street! Lots of them! They're heading toward the courthouse." Harriet's gut churned. The courthouse represented official authority. A direct attack on it would be the ultimate defiance. Sure enough, seconds later, a column of at least 10 motorcycles roared into view, led by a figure wearing an unmistakable vest with the red viper coiled around a skull. Colt Stanton. He brought the bikes to a halt right in front of the small crowd, dust billowing around them. Mothers ushered children behind trucks. Watchers raised camera phones, and Manny clenched his fists. Harriet, stepping forward, spotted the fury blazing in Colt's eyes. "So," Colt called, voice raw as he surveyed the assembled townspeople. "Word is, you've been whining to the state police. Think that'll save you?" His gaze latched onto Harriet, burning with resentful recognition. "Nurse, you started all this nonsense. Riled them up with cameras and courage." Harriet kept her voice steady, even though her pulse soared. "We won't be bullied. If you have half a brain, you'll get on those bikes and ride out of here before the troopers arrive." Colt let out a ragged laugh that sent chills down Harriet's spine. "We're not leaving without showing you what a real mistake you made." He swept a hand in the air, and his fellow bikers dismounted, spreading into a loose semicircle. Some brandished bats, chains, even a couple of guns visible at their hips. The watchers formed a protective line in front of Manny and Lucy, phones rolling, but tension rippled through the crowd. Fear was palpable. Harriet's radio crackled in her pocket. Sheriff Townsend's voice. "State troopers are minutes away. Hold your ground, but don't let them hurt you." Harriet clicked the radio once in acknowledgement, then faced Colt. "This can end without bloodshed," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your men walk away, and you face less time if you're smart enough to surrender." Colt's lips peeled back in a sneer. "We're done talking." With that, he lunged forward, swinging a length of heavy chain. Harriet jumped back reflexively, barely avoiding the strike. The watchers cried out. Bikers advanced, brandishing weapons, while townspeople retreated, some fumbling for makeshift defenses. Pandemonium erupted in the courthouse square. Harriet ducked a wild swing from another biker, grabbing his arm with trained precision and twisting it until he yelped and dropped a club. The next few seconds blurred as watchers tried to film while keeping distance. Manny tackled a biker who swung a bat at Lucy, both crashing into the dirt. Harriet shouted warnings, scanning for guns. If someone opened fire, it could be a massacre. A roar of engines shattered the chaos. Everyone froze at the sound of multiple police cruisers and motorcycles squealing to a halt on the far side of the square. Lights flashed brilliant red and blue. State troopers emerged in tactical gear, weapons raised, barking orders for everyone to drop to the ground. Colt's eyes flicked from Harriet to the approaching authorities, and a savage desperation contorted his features. In that split second, Harriet saw him reach for a pistol at his waist. She braced, heart in her throat, but a trooper, moving with lightning reflexes, fired a taser. 2 electrified darts hit Colt's vest, sending him sprawling. Around him, stunned bikers hesitated, seeing troopers rush in from all sides, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Relief flooded Harriet so powerfully she nearly collapsed. The watchers sprang into action, capturing it all on camera. The final takedown of Colt Viper Stanton and his remaining crew. Townspeople either dropped to their knees or backed away, hands visible, letting the troopers handle the arrests. Within minutes, handcuffs clicked into place. The bikers disarmed and hauled upright under the watchful eyes of uniformed men and women who had arrived just in time. Long after the bikers were subdued, Harriet stood in the courthouse square, breathing shallowly through the haze of dust kicked up by the confrontation. The setting sun painted the horizon in streaks of gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop for the tense scene winding down. Around her, troopers and deputies cataloged weapons, took statements, and read off a litany of charges: assault, extortion, arson, attempted murder. The Black Vipers, once so confident, now glowered in defeat, cuffed and shoved into patrol cars. A handful of watchers embraced each other with trembling relief. Lucy Caldwell, tears streaking her face, thanked Manny for saving her with that desperate tackle. Hank Porter, leaning on a volunteer for support, shook the hands of the troopers who had intervened. Even Sheriff Townsend, grim and stoic, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Harriet finally sank onto a wooden bench near the courthouse steps, arms shaking from the adrenaline crash. Deputy Lopez approached, removing her cap to wipe sweat from her brow. "Hell of a thing, huh?" she murmured, offering Harriet a water bottle. "Yeah," Harriet agreed, her voice thick. She gulped down water, eyes roving over the battered but unbroken townspeople. "I'm just glad it's over." Lopez nodded, then added softly, "They're calling you a hero, you know. Word's already spreading about how you organized this, how you kept it together." Harriet shook her head, swallowing a sob that threatened to surface. Memories of war hospitals flooded her again, moments when she'd stood amid chaos, trying to preserve life. She wasn't driven by pride or a desire for recognition. She just couldn't stand by while bullies and murderers trampled innocent people. "The town saved itself," she said hoarsely. "They stood together. I just helped them see how strong they already were." Lopez gave a rueful smile and patted Harriet's shoulder. "Sometimes that's exactly what a real leader does." A short while later, Harriet joined the troopers as they interviewed bystanders for official statements. The cameras, the watchers, the logs of incidents, everything Harriet had painstakingly compiled now served as the backbone of the case against Colt Stanton and the Black Vipers. The state troopers promised thorough prosecution. There would be no easy bail or trivial fines for these crimes. When Harriet finally returned to Rhodes's Fuel and Service, darkness had fallen again. But this time the quiet felt serene, not foreboding. Word had already spread that the Vipers had been arrested or run out of town. People began emerging from their homes, hugging in the streets, checking on neighbors. Inside the station, Reggie met Harriet with a shaky grin. "They're gone, right? We did it?" he asked, voice trembling with the fragile wonder of a person who can't quite believe the nightmare's over. Harriet exhaled. "Yes, Reggie, we did it." He laughed in relief, wiping his eyes. Somewhere outside, the sound of distant engines, police cruisers leaving town, echoed like a fading memory of strife. The following day, Lonesome Falls woke to a new reality. The Black Vipers, who had tormented them for weeks, were either in custody or in hiding. News vans rolled through, capturing footage of the small town that had defied intimidation and won. Manny's feed store was already being rebuilt, Hank's shop cleaned of soot, Lucy's diner fitted with new glass, and Ed, still resting at the clinic, received visitor after visitor thanking him for his courage. At sunrise, Harriet sat on the tailgate of her truck, sipping coffee as she watched the Texan sky glow orange. She felt a deep ache in her muscles and her heart, but also a profound sense of peace. Memories of war receded a bit, replaced by the image of a town that had rallied around one another in their darkest hour. When Ed, bandaged arm in a sling, joined her outside later, he asked, "So Harriet, are you moving on now that the trouble's gone?" She stared at the horizon for a long moment, recalling the scattered events that had brought her here. The first run-in with the bikers at the gas pump, the night spent coordinating watchers, the final chaos in the courthouse square. "No," she said quietly, surprising even herself with how certain she felt. "I think I've found my place." Ed nodded, smiling. "Lonesome Falls is lucky to have you." Actually, Harriet replied, watching a group of neighbors share breakfast on the diner's makeshift patio across the street, I'm the lucky one. This place fought back, and won, together. That's the real miracle. She hopped off the tailgate, sipping her coffee as the sun rose fully, illuminating a town unbroken by violence. In that golden light, Harriet felt the weight of her past lift just a little. Lonesome Falls had taught her something war never could. Sometimes healing isn't found in solitude, but in standing shoulder to shoulder with others, defending what's good, and discovering that unity can outshine even the darkest threats. When the dust finally settles and the last echo of thunderous engines fades into the Texas sunset, the town stands victorious, though forever changed. Harriet Clark, battered but unbroken, has seen this place evolve from a quiet backwater to a living monument of unity and unshakable resolve. Grandfathers who once quietly rocked on porch swings now swap stories of the night they helped turn back a ruthless gang. Folks of every generation discover that real backbone isn't about being young or strong. It's about refusing to buckle when your neighbors need you most. With the Black Vipers in handcuffs and their reign of terror ended, what remains is a testament to old-school American perseverance. Friendships have deepened, houses stand repaired, and hearts beat a little braver. We hope this story stirs your own sense of determination and small-town pride. Comment below with your thoughts, share your memories of steadfast communities, and let's keep this spirit alive. Together, we've proven that you're never too old and it's never too late to stand your ground.